AIHEC College is Alaska's only tribal college. We offer quality post-secondary, academic, vocational, and technical education aimed at matching the growing workforce needs. AIHEC prepares Alaskans for a world of possibility and opportunity. Join us at the top of the world, Barrow, Alaska. Visit us on the web at www.ailihec.edu. AIHEC College, Alaska's only tribal college.
Yate, I'm Carrie Billy, the President and CEO of AIHEC, the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. And we're here with this great group of tribal college presidents, administrators, faculty, and supporting organizations. So to have a great conversation today about the tribal college movement. But before we get started, I want to first thank President Pearl Brower and AIHEC College for hosting us in this beautiful place at the top of the world. It's such an amazing experience for all of us. So thank you for doing that. And then I want to thank the founders of Navajo Community College, now Diné College, for bringing us to this circle today. You know, I've said this many times. I've often wondered, looking back more than 50 years ago, if Dylan Paterno, Bob and Ruth Russell, Guy Gorman, and others, when they asked that question, how do you want our schools to look? They probably did not envision a cell phone. But they asked that question, how do you want...
Like, that was some good background. You're getting ready.
Yeah, that was pumping everyone up. How do you want our schools to look? Did they envision what we have today, which is 38 tribal colleges across 16 states serving 160,000 American Indians, Alaska Natives, and other rural community residents in academic and community-based programs every year? It is absolutely amazing. Really the best experiment and experience in tribal self-determination ever, I think. And so I'm honored to be here with all of you. And we'll kick it off with just a question to the presidents. It is the 50th anniversary of Navajo Community College, and so to you, what does that founding 50 years ago mean to your institution? Anyone want to? President Fernandez?
Yes.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm Laurel Vermillion. I'm president at Central College. We're located on Standing Rock in Wincumdus, North Dakota and South Dakota. Thinking about that question, I'm an alumna of our college. I was a student there back in, the early 70s, 73 I guess it was. I had just graduated high school, and so I started my higher education at my college. And so when I think about that, I think about, I don't think I would have even gone to college if our college wasn't there, because I come from, I'm an enrolled member of Standing Rock, and I come from a family that didn't go to high school. They didn't complete high school, and so college was really a foreign thought for us. It was people like Jack Barden, who I think many of you have known and heard that name. Jack became my mentor. I was working for Head Start as a teacher's aide, and he became really my mentor. They were starting the college back in '73, starting to offer classes. They were affiliated with Bismarck Junior College at the time. And so to me, college again was something that I wasn't really thinking about, but he really encouraged me to begin taking classes. And so, and I think it's, you know, the leadership of the 6 tribal colleges who were starting at that time. I really wasn't in the mix of all of that, but I was a student, and so all I knew is that classes were being offered, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so I started to take classes. And one thing I tell people about the tribal colleges is that I grew up through assimilation. And so I didn't really know my own language, my own Lakota, beautiful Lakota language. I didn't know my culture, I didn't know about the ceremony, I didn't know a lot because I wasn't taught. Even though my parents and grandparents were Lakota, they spoke Lakota in the home, they practiced, you know, things, and so but they never really taught me. And I think it was because the stories that my mom told me was that they didn't want me to have to go through some of the things they did in boarding schools by speaking their language. And so she said, we thought that, you know, we didn't need to teach you about your language. We thought we were going to be moving into a different world. So I don't blame them. I don't blame them for not teaching me. They did, I think, the best that they could do at that time. But it was when I started to take college classes that I really started to learn about who I was as a Native person. And it's happening still today. We still have students coming to us who don't know who they are. But by taking classes and learning about who they are through college, the practices that we have, they are starting to really be prideful about their culture and who they are. So I think it's because of that, that our students are starting to move forward with learning their language and learning who they are and becoming more prideful. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? President Russell?
Yeah, I guess I would just add that I think looking back at that 50 years ago, that I think what it showed us is that we have the solutions within our reservations. We don't have to look out, and I think that continues today. So when I think about the challenges that we had, we talked about the shrinking money and whatnot, is that those solutions are within, either within this circle here or our students or our students to be that are still coming. And so I think that's what that I think about in terms of what impact that has had to us for today.
So when I think about Diné being 50 years and our college, Salish Kootenai College, is now 40. And so we were later. But I think what was important in terms of our institution was watching Diné establish their college and knowing that we could take control of our higher education and really set that idea of self-determination into action through education. We were the tribe has been pretty progressive, but within some limits. And so the idea that we could have people educated and skilled in the areas that we needed, that were our own people, managing our own resources in a way that was business-minded but culturally grounded. Because we have a lot of natural resources, and we were bringing people from Boston and all over the place to tell us how to manage our timber and our water and our fish and all of that. And they were looking at it from the purely economic perspective, but we were interested in how do we manage those resources culturally for the future and what role they play in our tribal culture and ceremony and tradition. So it's not just timber for timber, it's timber for the cedar for the ceremony and the baskets, and it's the fish for the same things for that perpetuation, and the language too. And it was okay to speak the language, and it was okay to get grounded in those cultural identities. And it wasn't okay too much before that. And today, when you talk to our elders, they will tell you, our youngest elder will tell you, he's almost 80. And he says there's a gap now from there to about the next generation of elders, as they say, are in their 40s. And we know why that gap is there. But the reason that we have the next generation of elders is because of the college. Because we work so closely with our cultural committees and our cultural people that we've managed to revive and perpetuate all of that, where for at least 40 years we didn't, that generation. So it was very important.
Thank you, that's really insightful. I'm wondering, President Bordeaux, who's been with the tribal college movement almost, well, since its inception, and who is the nation's longest serving sitting president of any college or university, which is a tremendous accomplishment. But I'm wondering how you see the tribal college movement, how it's changed from back in the beginning, 50 years ago, how, if at all, have the goals, the successes, and the challenges changed over your tenure as a president?
Thank you. Very honored to sit here amongst the very distinguished educational leaders. Yes, I was very fortunate at an early age to be introduced and brought into the futuristic thinking of some individuals who themselves did not have the education that certainly we have in this table here. But they were educated in probably more profound ways than certainly myself will ever be. And their teacher was the whole community. And they had a very difficult time living through the 20s and the 30s, the 40s and the 50s. And they wondered if they continued on this path, what was the future for generations yet to be born? And so, relying upon medicine men and spiritual leaders, they sat down and had discussions, and they went to ceremonies, and they sought guidance from the spirit world through the departed ancestry, asking for assistance in terms of direction and strength as to how to address this seemingly dilemma that they found themselves in, and they did not want to see future generations be subjected and victimized by what and how they were. And they sat down and spiritually conceptualized a method by which to address that. And knowing that what they had in mind to to counter the measures of colonization that had penetrated tribal ranks would be difficult utilizing those same tribal measures that their ancestry had. They went about it in terms of, in some small ways, patterning a higher education model after the non-tribal entities that existed. When they sought to establish their own methods of learning, they were told that as long as these fit into the criteria utilized by existing educational institutions at that time. For instance, with us, when we called the Higher Learning Commission and told them that we did not need them, we were going to develop our own model, and based on the treaties and our own sovereignty, we were going to create our own institution of learning, however that was to be defined and carried out. And Higher Learning Commission, which was at that time North Central Accreditation Association, said, fine, that's good. You're going to go about it in that fashion, but just be mindful of the fact that any of your graduates will not ever be able to be teachers in our accredited institutions, be it K through 12 or whatever, unless you pay the fee and jump through our hoops. You're not going to be in any fashion recognized or accepted as an educational institution in this country. And that was a tremendous blow to be told that. And so we sat back and we had discussions. We had prayers, again ceremonies by spiritual leaders. And we said, okay, let's back up and let's take a look at what it is that we have to do in order to be accepted, because what we want to do is to create an educational vehicle that begins to address the measures of colonization that were seemingly starting to take over. As an example, not too long before Russell Means died, he and I used to have some late night discussions. And he said, Lionel, I can't do anything on the Pine Ridge. He said, colonization has done too good a job on our tribal people. It's difficult to combat. He said, I put out an agenda. I run for tribal president. I've been rejected. And he said, that's very difficult to take and to understand. And that's kind of what our founders were faced with. And it's what we're still faced with. And it's pretty much what we're still being forced into as AIHEC institutions. In order to survive, we've had to alter some of our thinking to accommodate what is it Congress wants? What is it the accreditation agencies want? What is it states want? We do not own our own education. We've been given permission to somewhat redefine our own educational ownership. But until we control our own certification, our own accreditation, in accordance with our own spirituality, our own sovereignty, our own tribal laws, we will continue to have to take that round circle and put it around that square peg. The two don't match. And yet that's what we are forced to do in order to survive and to try to create that vehicle that will go forth and redefine and restructure and articulate an educational system that is us and not who somebody else wants us to be. And that's our challenge, to intellectually review and analyze the tribal, federal relations, along with the state, the county, the municipal, and bring about a system that has a cultural foundation with a cultural vision, and that's accepted as a living part of the whole of which we live in. And that's a difficult challenge and struggle. But it's who we are and who our founders wanted us to address. So we're looking at chapter 2 of AIHEC. And as such, somewhere we need to begin to conceptualize a plan to address chapter 2 and who we want to be and not who somebody else wants us to be. And my recommendation would be that this fall we begin to sit down with NIEA, NCAI, NIGA, and others and hold a meeting with prayer and ceremonies with our spiritual leaders for 4 days and begin to pull together a plan to address the future that so many of our youth are talking about today in their rejection of what they see. Newt Gingrich was on CNN television here one night, and he said because there's a lack of a strong national tribal policy, he said terrible things are happening on our tribal homelands. And he recited, he went right down the line, in educational, health, just the poorest statistics you could possibly have. And then he said, on the Rosebud Sioux Indian Reservation in South Dakota, my ears perked up like the old donkey on Hee-Haw. He said, they lead the world in suicides. How's that for hopelessness and despair where one lives, that youth encounter? And that's shameful. That is shameful to hear that, and to hear a man of his stature tell the world and define to the world who we are as tribal people. That's our role and that's our responsibility. That's why tribal colleges and universities were founded, to counter this and to address it and to create and to articulate a worldview that our ancestry knew. Yes, you need to plug in today and tomorrow. But the other values, they need to be part of it. And that's chapter 2 of who we are, and chapter 2 of AIHEC. Carlos Montezuma, back in the 19-teens, talked about this. So there were individuals throughout time who have addressed this. They weren't able to do what our founders back in the 50s and 60s did in creating AIHEC and the institutions of higher learning. We have, 567 tribal nations, and we have 35, 36, 37 of them who have institutions of higher learning. So we have a long way to go before this thinking that come from Dene, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and all of the tribal nations that are represented in this circle here. But that's where we need to spend some time and discussion, thinking about a pre-plan for a bigger event where we all come to Washington, D.C., where our people have on their regalia, and we show D.C. that Wolakota, tribal way of life, is alive and well. Present a manifesto to them, much like the American Indian movement did after they took over the BIA. They left a 20-point manifesto. That still awaits presentation and an acting upon. And that can be part of who we are in the itinerary that we want to develop for the future, for ourselves and for the country and for the world to see, where ancestry can be happy with who we are. Pilamaya Palo. Thank you.
Sort of follow up on that, on President Bordeaux's remarks. I wanted to turn to President Russell, President of Diné College, because Diné College has spent the past several months and is spending this past year reflecting on the founding of Diné College and the Diné College over the past 50 years, and I'm wondering how that reflecting on the past has influenced where your college is going in the future. How are you acting on the mission, the goals of the founders and your experience over the past 50 years to sort of create that new vision, that second circle that President Bordeaux is talking about?
Yeah, I think at Diné College, one of the things that we looked at when this year started is to actually think, again, we come from a very specific point of view, a Navajo perspective. And while we honor the stories from the past, we don't dwell on them in a way of just always looking over your shoulder. So, you know, in a Navajo ceremony, if you have something done, you have it done, and then you move forward. You don't keep wondering, did it work? Am I okay now? You act and you move forward. So a big part of that was, in looking backwards, it was to honor, to say thank you, but to really look at how this impacts us going forward. So we created, you know, some speaker series of having people that, you know, were integral in developing the college, were a part of it. Our first graduate, Peter McDonald, who was the chairman when we built the new campus that we're in. Different people like that to come in and talk about their impact, but also telling them we want you to look forward, not just backwards. And with politicians, sometimes that's a little difficult, especially past politicians. But I think one of the things that we looked at early on is we started trying to think about what was the purpose that we had in the beginning? What was the reason for that college? What was, you know, what was the thinking of that time and that era, and what has changed? So one of the things that came up very early on in the development of the college, the Board of Regents issued a proposal to get in working with the Tribal Council and working with the administration at that time, to develop alternative ways to create money for the nation. So that the Board of Regents allocated $8,000 to do a study on alternative resource development for the Navajo Nation. They hired a economist from UNM. That $8,000 investment created the business alternative tax, which then ended up the right for the Navajo Nation and then ultimately the Indian tribes to be able to tax the Kerr-McGee lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court. That $8,000 investment has now returned over $2 billion to the Navajo Nation. And so we took that idea and said, okay, those types of things, what else can we do as we move forward? And so one of the things in the conversations that we're having talking about the future of the Net College is that if you look at the different states, you know, Arizona, New Mexico, any state in this country, a big part of economic development is tied to higher education. They play a significant role in the development of not just jobs, but of new economies. It's a change of way of thinking. When Diné College first started as NCC, it was very transactional. A student came, they learned a skill, they got a job. It was really just one-to-one-to-one. I think part of what we were looking at in terms of how looking back helped us think about what is our new mission going forward is, while we continue that process of someone comes to us, they earn a degree and they can get a job, that we need to think bigger. We need to now start being back like they did before. We need to think about what are those emerging economies? How can we get in front of economic development and not behind economic development? And so that's something that we've been focused on very much in this past year, is taking elements of what we do, of what we want to do, and looking and working with different entities and partnering, creating, you know, not just jobs for people, but actually economies. So we're looking at expanding our agriculture business. We're looking at how can we try to tie in what is traditional to us also moving forward. And I think that's partly, you know, this reflection back is to look at what's in our future is different than what we did in the past. It's not saying what happened, that was a different time, and I think that's something that also that we were able to really think about. You know, very few of us are, and I was young, you know, I used to be dragged around. I remember going to tribal council meetings with my dad as they discussed Navajo Community College and just playing in the pews of the tribal council chambers while they had those discussions. So I was dragged around, you know, to all of these different meetings. I went to Washington. I remember meeting Robert F. Kennedy before this, is even before you had the college, but, you know, the creation of Rough Rock Demonstration School, which was the forebearer of the tribal colleges. It showed that tribes could control their own education. And I think that, you know, that really left a mark in me. So part of looking backwards in terms of just honoring our past has been to look at the impact we've made locally. but also redefine what it means to be local. So how do we then try to impact our local community? And one of the things that, you know, being at Saylee, we're in a very remote part of the reservation. We're not at the population centers. So how do we try to get people attracted to come to, you know, this more remote area? And what was the reason for having students come to Saylee instead of, say, Winter Rock or Tuba City or Shiprock in the beginning, and try to understand a better understanding of why they came there? And I think, again, it comes back to what was said earlier, you know, when we talk about coming home. The campus of Dannett College is built as a home. It's, you know, you enter from the east. It has where the library is the middle, where the fire is and the knowledge, and then where you sleep is where we have our dorms in that circle. And we have it's laid out that way. But that is very, you know, important for us looking forward to, the idea of being able to come home. What do you come home for? What do you expect to learn from your home? That also allows us to look forward, and I think that's what we're looking at, is how do we integrate that? So we're right now hoping, you know, every couple of minutes I'm looking, checking my email to see if I got a notice from HLC to say that our bachelor's in Dannett Studies will be approved, because they're recommending for approval now. And you think about that, 50 years after, we're finally now getting a bachelor's. NTU has had theirs for almost 10 years now. And here we are just now getting our bachelor's degree. But what do we need to do? What do we need to make it different? So again, the example of moving forward is we changed it. It's very much about aligning with the Navajo Nation and their education, their accountability workbook. So we're looking at developing Navajo language teachers, Navajo culture teachers, very specifically. We still have math and science and those other teachers, but what can they not get anywhere except Dannett College? That's what we're going to focus on. That's what we're going to deal with now that we have this other, you know, way to work with the other tribes. So we had a lot of events planned for the year. You're all invited September 22nd, I'm sorry. We're having a gala down in Scottsdale to kind of honor some of the things we're talking about. And then at the end in November, we're also going to be having a reception and honoring back in Washington the signing of the Navajo Community College Act that was done, you know, to create, even though it wasn't 50 years, it still is it was signed in November. So we're trying to take this opportunity to shed light on what we're trying to do moving forward. But I think a big part of this is changing the mindset. We need to, you know, go big, go home. We need to think bigger than just the in terms of individual jobs. We need to be a part of the tribal community that we work in. We need to be a part of the tribal government that we work in. We are changing our Dannett Policy Institute to focus on sustainability as well as leadership development and not just policy analysis. So we're looking at those things. What can we do to help the Navajo Nation grow, as well as what can we do to look at how we can have Dannett College grow. So we're trying to be a bigger partner in that process. Just like you would see, you know, we live in the state of Arizona, and the president of Arizona State University is into everything. I mean, everything in that state, there he is doing this, and that. I'm not saying I want to be everywhere, but I think the college needs to be everywhere and be able to develop, you know, programs that meet the needs of the Navajo Nation. I think that's the thing I'll end with, and that is when they started, they created the motto, the institution of higher learning for the Navajo people. It has changed to say Navajo Nation, but the original wording was the Navajo people, and we're going back to that. What do the Navajo people need first, and then the Navajo Nation? And I think that changes the way you look at a problem and a solution. And so I think part of the thing that we're looking at is saying we need to be part of the solutions of the future, not just focus on the problems. I always, you know, I get kind of upset when it seems like we're just in love with the problem, but we never really focus on the solution. So we're trying to be solution oriented as we move to our next 50 years.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think what's really interesting about what you said is really you validated the purpose, the original creation of Navajo Community College and all tribal colleges, that innovation, to create innovation and education that's relevant to our people and our place. And so you're doing exactly what they did, but doing it in the 21st century. And that is really amazing. So it just gives me goosebumps. That's what all of you are doing. So it's just really incredible. So as we look forward to doing all of that innovation and sustaining our people, I think that's another important point of what everyone was talking about this morning. What are the opportunities that you see on the landscape? And sometimes when you think about opportunities, you also have to think about some challenges. But looking at it in terms of opportunities and challenges, I'm wondering, President Yarlott, what do you see to really continue to realize that vision that our founders had? What are you looking at as opportunities and challenges over the next several years?
Thank you for the question. David Yarlett, President of Little Bighorn College, Crow Agency, Montana. As I think about this question, we have to think that we have 37 tribal colleges servicing, different tribal nations, more than the 37 colleges that are represented, but many, many more tribal nations that come through our doors. And in that sense, you have to think about not only the opportunities, but the challenges that each respective nation, each respective tribal college faces. Because even though we may have similarities, each region faces different opportunities and also many, many different challenges. And you have to deal with that as far as providing a service. But on a broader scale, we have to adjust and adapt to the changing environment. Policy changes, personnel, our students. I say that because right now we're dealing with students that are millennial. They want information instantaneously. They learn a little bit different. But that will probably change in the next few years. And even though we are rooted in our mission with our culture and language, how do we balance that? How do we balance maintaining the teaching of our culture and our languages, but yet meeting the needs not only of our students, but our communities and also the world around us? Many of the things that change around us, but there's still values and beliefs that are still standing. The beliefs that our ancestors, the vision that they had. That is a charge to us to continue to maintain that. Being who we are as Native people, respectively, our own tribal nations, our own tribal people. But how do we meet the demands if we want to be institutions that are accredited moving forward, to provide opportunities for our students, the skill levels, the academic levels? What are the criteria that are going to continue to change? So it's those kinds of things that that we need to continue to keep our minds and our hearts open to. Sometimes we get to be set in our own ways. It's based on our own personal experiences, and we forget about what are the needs of the people we serve. I used to think that when I first became the president, I was taught a certain way. And I was naive that that was the only way. But that wasn't the needs of our students. So I had to step back and think, am I going to restrict the students that are coming through our doors to my way of thinking, my way of learning? Or am I going to open it up so that they can thrive and be who they want to be? The things that are continuing to change, and sometimes it's a little sensitive, but I am going to go ahead and bring up some of the issues that are coming up, is the gender issues. How do we deal with that? Some of our tribal elders that provide advice and guidance for us are setting up their way. How do we balance that? because there are needs and demands that are coming up that are different than we're accustomed to. So it's those kinds of things that we need to be open to. I don't have those solutions to share with you, but saying that we should be open to those kinds of thoughts and ideas if we're going to continue to provide service. There's a growing interest from abroad also. I've had a number of visits. I've been down to Brazil. There is a real keen interest of tribal colleges, or what they're calling indigenous colleges. They're wanting to learn from us as far as AIHEC. What can they do to provide indigenous colleges? Just a week and a half ago, I met with somebody from Russia, and there is an interest from the indigenous people of Russia of developing tribal colleges. And so it's those kinds of things that we need to be open to. I know that there's certain things that we may not be able to do, but being open to the possibilities. And one of the challenges I see is that as we move forward, not to forget our founding fathers, like President Lionel Bordeaux. What was the vision? But also we have new presidents that are coming up, to remind them of what the purpose of tribal colleges were. And keep in mind that our purpose is to move forward and still providing service, to make sure our identities as tribal nations, tribal people, are still intact, but also being open to new ideas from the new colleges that are coming up, new presidents. So I think the challenges are out there. Like I said, I don't have any solutions. I continue to share ideas like we did this morning, sharing best practices. Some things that have been done someplace else may work in our communities. Some may not. But continuing to have these kinds of open conversations, listening respectfully, and picking the best practice that may work in our communities and moving forward, but also continuing to be reminded how we originally got started. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, empowering tribal people at home and around the world. That's really cool. Real question I have is for Pearl Grower, because even though we are in the 21st century, we haven't invented a battery that lasts forever. So we have a limited amount of time here. But President Brower, especially taking in context the whole discussion today, but just in your experience as a fairly new president, one of our youngest presidents, where do you see the future of the tribal college movement in 25 or 50 years? Or however far you can see on that horizon, and you can see pretty far off that
Can't see
window.
very far. That's always, I get kind of the exciting question, so I'm sure a lot of other presidents have their opinions and views as well. I really like President Bordeaux when he said chapter 2, because I think that it's a journey, right? And there's going to be hopefully tens and hundreds of chapters as we move along this path. When I think of tribal colleges and I think of what they do in their communities, I always see a heartbeat, and a very strong heartbeat, because tribal colleges, not only are they a community center in communities across the country, but they really are the change agent. At no other institution do we have the opportunity for a resident, a tribal member, a community member to go and really completely change their lives. And we see that. We see that all the time. I know that yesterday one of our staff, Justina, was sharing that just last week we had a student yelling down the hallways that they just got their GED. And that's going to change his life. He's from our smallest community. There's only 150 or so people in his community. And I think that's probably one of the biggest successes he's had in his 20 plus years. And that's what we do at tribal colleges. That's how we change our communities, and in fact we change the world. And so when I think about the next 25 to 50 years, Chapter 2, I see in particular just these stronger and stronger institutions and the recognition in our country that we deserve for really what we do on the broader scale. I also think that we will, I'm gonna, in my most optimistic view is that we will have equitable funding. So we won't have to work so hard because we spend so much time working so hard to fund our institutions to do the great work that they do. We then have to that takes time away from really creating those opportunities for change for our community members. I also, because we change individuals, we change families. And so we have stronger, in the next 50 years, we'll see our communities be stronger and stronger, and we'll see the effects of all of that. I also just see these, when we think about our culture and think about the movement and the fact that we focus so much, our missions are always driven by who we are as Indigenous people, that that cultural piece will continue and be so vibrant. We'll hear our native languages and we'll see our cultural traditions being practiced, not only at our institutions, but at our community institutions and even further. So I think that is a really, really bright and exciting future. And really at the end of the day, and then in Chapter 2, I hope it ends with, I think that, and I shouldn't say hope because I want to believe it, I'm going to be super optimistic, but that we really are recognized as the strongest educational communities in the U.S. because we truly are, and we're truly probably some of the most life-changing.
Great, thank you. That is helpful and inspiring. And just before I ask the last question, I just want to remind everyone at our last board meeting something that John Eagle said that I have repeated many times that I think is so consistent with what you said. Because of tribal colleges, we are not one generation away from losing our languages. We're one generation away from saving our languages. That is the power of tribal colleges, exactly what you said. So thank you, President Vermillion, for that gift of bringing him to us to give us that inspiration and that goal to really believe in. So I appreciate it. So the last question we have for everyone is, if you could, let me make sure we're going to talk about hope, but maybe about belief. So what do you think, how would you describe tribal colleges in terms of being the hope of tribal colleges in the future, the hope for Indian country, or your belief? And what is going to allow us to change that hope to belief in the next 50 years, in the next chapter, or I call it the next circle of the tribal college movement? So we'll start with President Bible from College of Muskogee Nation.
One word, correct?
Yeah, one word. Oh, this is one word, and you can't repeat the word. Do you want the mic?
No, I think fine. One word, opportunity.
Opportunity, okay.
Had a long time to think, so. Resilience.
Resilience, great.
Legacy.
Legacy, great.
Visibility.
Visibility, good, okay.
Innovation.
Innovation.
Investment.
Investment, yep, that's good.
Community.
Community, great.
Reservation.
Reservation?
Preservation.
Preservation, right.
Empowerment.
Empowerment,
Adaptability.
adaptability. Spatial.
Uniqueness.
Uniqueness.
Perseverance.
Perseverance.
Goals.
Goals.
Sustainability.
Great.
Revolution.
Revolution, all right.
Vision.
Vision, good. President Little Persistence? I thought you were going to say something in Cheyenne. President Boham.
Perpetuation.
Perpetuation. Great, thank you all so much. I'll add the one word that I told all of you, don't repeat. But that's students. They're really gonna lead us into the next chapters, the next circle, and to all the circles beyond that. So thank you all so much for participating today. This has just been an incredible lesson and privilege. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Brad, for having this idea and for forcing us to do this.
Yes. A little bit of.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good job.